welcome to another session of a webinar hosted by Lucidity. It's a live session where we bring in industry leaders from FinOps, IT Ops, people who are living and experiencing things in the world and sharing their experience so that we can get more actionable information as we operate our day-to-day operations. Hi, I'm Raj Dutt. I'll be the moderator for today's session where we will cover how automation or autonomous, the era of AI is changing the FinOps. And in this session, we'll cover a few things. We'll look at how the AI workloads are fundamentally changing cloud cost predictability. What we'll also cover is the evolution that FinOps is going through during this whole autonomous or automation that's taking more autonomous than automation, I would say. And then the guardrails that are required to have safety around it, the governance piece. And to have that discussion, I want to welcome Dieter Matzion. He is the Senior Cloud Governance Engineer at Roku. Welcome, Dieter. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And you have a fantastic background. I was looking through your background. You currently are you're driving the cloud technology and infrastructure at Roku. But you have had multiple roles across household names. I mean, I was looking at from you've been at Netflix, you've been at Google, you've done stuff at Intuit. So fantastic background, and you recently came back from a trip as well. I see you're someone who has a lot of outdoor things that you do outside the work. Is a lot of outdoor, from hiking, camping, horseback riding, which is fantastic. But one thing that definitely caught my attention was your cave exploration. So would love to get some pointers on that. But without further ado, let's dive into the topic. I mean, how can we have a webinar series without talking about AI and autonomous workloads and processes that are happening? And to kick off the discussion, let me take a step back. Let me think more from as not just FinOps, but every function relies fairly heavily on dashboards. I mean, dashboard, we all have a dashboard. I have my dashboard, everyone has a dashboard. Coming to FinOps, and I was looking at a report published by Infosys, and I'm going to take a look at my notes here on the side. It said almost 50% of the organizations that they surveyed have dashboards or they track cloud cost. Yet 50% or a large portion of them are over-provisioned, underutilized. And I know that's a fact because we at Lucidity, we see that all day long. So question that I do want to ask you, and I'm sure people on the call as well are experiencing that. Are we, as in the FinOps world, over invested in reporting? Are dashboards going to become obsolete as FinOps become more modernized?
I don't think so, but we'll see some shifts, right? Large language models enable having a natural conversation, right, and get answers to your questions. So, for example, I have a Confluence page where we have all the vendors that I'm responsible for, right? There's over 40 of them, and I can ask the Confluence page questions. You know, which vendors are coming up for renewal next month, stuff like that, right? So that's new. That didn't exist 3 years ago, right? But I just also want to let the audience know, right, that finance had existing processes for essentially hundreds of years, right? Well before cloud started in 2006. And these finance processes are, let's say, monthly budget reviews, right? Where we take a look at, for each engineering leader, are they over or are they under budget? And typically, if they are over budget, it is related to projects progressing faster than anticipated, right? So you're having more cloud spend than you were supposed to because something is moving faster. A migration may be moved up in their timeline. And if something is under budget, we find that often it has something to do with hiring, right? Hiring is not progressing as quickly as it should. So there are these processes that are core to the business, right? forecasting, anomaly detection, those kind of things, right? That will always be there and will require these dashboards, right? For example, if you look at an anomaly, um, you look at the last 14 days, it may look terrible. If you look at the last 365 days, you may see a pattern that this happens over and over again, right? So while it is a local anomaly, in a larger time horizon, it is a common occurrence, right? So we need to be aware of that. But with the ability, and I still haven't seen, we have Datadog, we have New Relic, we have Honeycomb, we have many observability. We use internal observability tools like Grafana and Prometheus, Loki, those kind of solutions, right? That are servicing more system-related information. And we still haven't seen vendors switch to actually using speech to ask you questions, right? You still have to type, which I feel is cumbersome, right? It would be much easier if you could just talk to the thing. And maybe that is something that we're going to see coming up in the future.
So if I was to sum it up, the dashboards are not going to go away, but the utilization of dashboards are going to change. More intuitive, more interactive, where queries can be asked in more of a natural language model or in natural language, and then models are able to generate hopefully across different platforms and across different tools and centralize that and bring it back. So,
and to expand on that, you can actually establish KPIs for dashboards, right? How often is the dashboard being viewed? How many unique users does a dashboard have? And how frequently do people scroll to areas on the dashboard that are not immediately visible? All that information can help you to provide KPIs around those dashboards and how useful they are.
Yeah, and the ones that are not working out, replace them, because otherwise it becomes a lot of noise.
Exactly.
So, given that we are in the AI world, the AI has fundamentally changed the cost predictability piece, because the things that previously were measured or tracked and measured and managed are changing. So, how should the FinOps practitioners rethink the whole idea of new cost variables in the AI era?
There is different areas of how I see cost manifest around AI, right? One is that you use an API, so you are using someone else's AI, right? And use an API, and then you pay for tokens. The other area that I see is that we use in-house hardware or virtual machines that are being provisioned to run that AI. And I see a progression where maybe in the beginning you use tokens with a vendor like an OpenAI or an Anthropic. They are very popular, right? Or Gemini as well. And then once you want to productionalize that workload, you maybe switch to an in-house model, right? And another effect that I'm observing over time is that not only that the quality of these models increases. Anthropic, the latest model Mythos, has not been released because it uncovered over 1,000 zero-day vulnerabilities. Those are software exploits that attackers can use, and so that large language model is sort of like on the next level, what we can expect these models to look like, right? And it also is an evidence that using artificially generated training data is working and scaling well, right? Because we exhausted all the human available training data. So I see that shift, right, when you productionalize, but I also see a quality increase and a price decrease, right? The older models are much more cheaper compared to the state-of-the-art models. So if you're running on an older model, the quality may be sufficient for your application, but the pricing is going down over time.
Yeah, in fact, one of the other things that I've seen, and I was also reading in the same Infosys report, and we experience at Lucidity, I would say probably from the last six to 8 months or so now, is things that previously were not top of mind pre-AI era. Storage, as an example, everyone was driving to optimize their compute. Then with the whole GPU movement, that was the big one. But what has been creeping up, and now folks are waking up to it, is the storage, because storage, persistent storage, high performance storage is required. And given that there are these spikes in the AI world, as you're running these models, training these models, but also saving the data, the actual model itself, there is the need to have you cannot just live with a static storage anymore. There needs to be, so that is something again that we're seeing more and more, where the awareness and the sense of urgency has changed and focus more on the storage front. So more things are getting. Sorry, go ahead.
And to expand on that, depending on the cloud provider and the product that you're using, the storage that you're using may actually be tied to virtual machines. So at some point, right, there is a virtual machine that is making that storage available. So if you need a lot of storage, all of a sudden your cost is going up quite substantially, because that storage has to be served in some way, shape or form or another, right? So like, for example, if you look at persistent disks on the GCP cloud, right, they are served by, this is not just like a separate product. You need to really understand how the product works under the hood, and use it efficiently accordingly.
Yeah, in fact, you called out GCP. We have done over 700. In fact, we just released a report which was based on 700 plus assessments that our enterprise customers have gone through. There's a significant portion in Azure. In Azure, though we are in Switzerland, we work with all three, and we like all three. Azure seems to be the biggest culprit or the biggest gap when we talk about storage specifically. And it is definitely to do with their architecture. It's also to do with the fact that they don't give visibility. The level you can provision it, but you won't know how much is actually utilized, block storage specifically. And then the worst is their commercials. The way they package their licenses force people to actually go in multiples, though you might not need it. And in the world of AI, those multiples will change very quickly, because your workloads are expanding and contracting at a very rapid pace. So a very interesting time to be in cloud optimization, whether it's storage, compute, anything else. So you're talking about autonomous, right? So as the workloads are becoming autonomous, in your experience, what's the human loop? I mean, at what point in the infrastructure should take the decision by itself, and at what point the humans are still required?
That is a good question, right? And maybe you get started with using human in the loop mostly, right? And then as you gain confidence, you can eliminate that and rely more on the automation. That is a trend that I'm seeing, right? However, there will always be workflows or scenarios, use cases, where you need that human escalation, right? We can have cost spikes, right? We can have cost spikes that are like $500 a day, or we can have a cost spike that is $20,000 an hour. Some of those cloud services scale to incomprehensible levels, right? They scale very well. If you do an S3 object transition on Amazon Web Services, right? That thing, it doesn't matter if it's 1 million or 1 billion objects. It will perform, just fine. However, the price will be 1,000x more, right? So if you have this 20,000 an hour cost spike, right? You need to quickly identify who to reach out to, right? For this workload. And that person needs to know which engineers to engage to investigate this, right? So there will always be some components that require immediate attention, versus things that can be looked at the end of the month in aggregate. What does your budget look like? How do you perform against that budget? Those kind of things, right? Also, when it comes to migrating workloads, setting up new workloads, you need to estimate what that workload will look like in the cloud. Maybe you have an idea what it looked like in a previous version, or in a data center, right? And that will guide your estimation process, right? But the AI still has some issues with numbers. For example, I just started using AI to do legal reviews, right? And the payment terms, we typically prefer net 60, so that we have 60 days to pay the vendor. And that thing didn't see a net 6. So basically the 0 was missing, right? And it just didn't catch that because it still has some...
Just a 0.
Yeah, just a 0, but it still has some issues, right? And we see that across, and maybe we'll touch on that later, right? What are the challenges with AI? What works well and what doesn't work well?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the scale that you are operating, whether it's at Roku, whether it's at Netflix, Google, I mean, these are not small environments, and I'm pretty sure, without getting into the specifics of the architecture, AI is already involved in majority of the operations, but the human loop is very critical, because we don't want to be in a situation at that scale where decisions like, we're laughing at it's just 1-0, but the reality is that 1-0 can be a very significant change in the business actions.
Exactly. Yeah.
So building on that, what are the different guardrails that we're talking about human in the loop, but at scale where everything is so much automated, autonomization is happening at a very, very rapid pace? What are different guardrails that you are thinking about, you are hearing from your peers, should be in place, or at least attendees should start to think about, especially when there are financial decisions and the infrastructure decisions involved in the direction we are all heading?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. The concept of a paved road is that you have these guardrails, right? So that if an engineer bumps or veers off the road, of the paved road, that they bump into the guardrail instead of flying over and crashing, in a canyon or something like that, right? So you have these guardrails in place. We typically have something around cost spikes where we say like, this has to be more than $2,000 for us to investigate, because opening a ticket, let's say a Jira ticket, right, has a cost. As a FinOps ambassador, I do consulting outside of my organization as well, and I have permission to do so. And there are some organizations that estimated that the average cost for a single Jira ticket is somewhere around $18,000, right? So that will help you to guide what those guardrails should look like, right? For my current organization, it is $2,000, but they may look different for others. And at my previous organization, we had certain services that are extremely expensive on the cloud provider side, right? Amazon Web Services Macy is such an example, or flow logs is another example, right? That, yeah, you can, if you need to do an investigation, you can turn on flow logs, right, to get more visibility into where this traffic is coming from, but they need to be limited to hours, not days, right? So there is these guardrails as well, that if needed, you can, pull the red lever and do your investigation, but this is not something that we can sustain over time, right? This has to be very compartmentalized in time to keep the cost low. So you will always have these types of guardrails, and they will depend on your organization. Some organizations, they feel comfortable just disabling certain cloud products, right? While other organizations, they prefer to give that flexibility to the engineers. but the engineers, with power comes responsibility. You need to use these products responsibly and be aware of what the cost is, right? We just had an engineer this morning that had a request to enable an AI product on the Google Cloud. And I asked them if they have budget approval. Yes, they do. But their request to have this product enabled needed approval, and I'm like, you have my approval. This is on the cloud vendor side. They need to provide you approval. So I directed the engineer to talk to the vendor, and the vendor confirmed that yes, it usually takes a couple of business days to enable that functionality on a Google project. Because it is such an expensive thing to do. Maybe they need hardware dedicated to this, or God knows what the vendor is doing on their side, right? But this is not something that is, you can just use it, right? It needs some approval process on the vendor side as well. So be aware of that, right? It's not just governance. The cloud vendor may have governance in place as well.
So very, very similar to the policies that we have had pre-AI era as well. Almost everyone, there are thresholds that are established in the system, whether it's budget approvals, whether it's different kind of approvals, the process of checks and balances. It has always existed within enterprise. Now it's becoming more agentic or AI based. So the same guardrails need to expand. The only challenge that we see is it is much faster. The time it takes to reaction should be much faster because agents are significantly much faster than humans, and the impact will also be significantly faster.
And additionally, I want to expand, right? There is also a shift. In the data center, there was procurement process, right? So some tech leader decided that they need this type of hardware and this much of this type of hardware, right? And then some vendor needed to build those, sheet metal boxes, put CPUs and motherboards and drives in them, and package them and ship them. We had to unpackage them, put them in racks, power them, network, all that stuff, right? So the procurement process was able to be controlled by the finance team, right? Because all of these were invoices that were going back and forth. So if someone ordered something, the finance team had visibility and could veto that, right? They could say like, you just made a $250,000 purchase last month. You're making another $250,000 purchase. Your budget is only $250,000. What is going on here? In the cloud, that responsibility shifted from the finance team to the engineers, right? So, and the engineers, that is what really FinOps is about, right? That it is a culture shift where the engineers take responsibility for the cost, right? They are already used to optimizing, for performance, for latency, for all kinds of things, and they need to see cost as another vector that they need to optimize.
Yeah, in fact, you give me a good segue into my next discussion or next topic, which is beyond the technical aspect of the role that we're talking about. It goes to the functional level. We're also looking at some information out there. In fact, some of it was published by the FinOps Foundation. Some of it is coming from IDC, but there are just more and more, like 75% organizations. That's what IDC is looking at, or have Gen AI or agentic AI helping FinOps practitioners with their operations. So with something like that in mind and looking at the function itself, do you foresee that the FinOps function is evolving into an AI governance function, something that historically has been more focused on tactical cost, economics, but giving more into strategic and oversight?
I think a FinOps practitioner always had to do both, right? Tactical and strategic. That is one of the key requirements for that role, that you need to be able to communicate at different levels, right? If you're talking to a CFO, they need information presented differently from an engineer, right? And you also, the conversation will be different with a CFO, right? It will be a more strategic-driven conversation, while with an engineer, you may have a specific cost anomaly or something like that, right? That is just focused on this one thing. So there always was a requirement that this FinOps practitioner cannot be just engineering focused, right? If they are not partnering with the finance team, they won't be able to be effective in the role. And depending on the organizational culture, you may also have to engage with the CTO or CIO and the CFO as well, right? For example, at my previous organization, we had quarterly business reviews of cloud spend with both, right? The CIO and the CFO. CFO, very nice person. And so you always have that requirement for that role. Now, your specific question is AI going to change at what level you operate? And I think yes, to some extent, right? I'm using AI every day. And if you're not, what will happen is that I will be faster than you are, right? I have over 40 vendors. If I can just get in 5 seconds the response by asking a Excel spreadsheet or a Confluence page a question, right? Rather than going line by line and doing it myself, right? 5 seconds versus minutes. I will be much faster in my job, and the large language models are now sufficiently accurate where this is useful, right? I tried this 2 years ago. It wasn't. It made mistakes. It oversights, right? It skipped things. The lookup didn't quite work properly, right? Now I think the capabilities are astonishingly accurate, right? Other than you ask around specific numbers, that's still a problem. But I think that you will always have a tactical component where you have that $20,000 an hour cost spike, right? Where an engineer did something and they were unaware of what the underlying cost implications are, where you have to have these channels established as a FinOps practitioner. That you can reach out to an engineering leader and you say, hey, this is really important. This cannot wait, right? We need to look at this now. And that is also, to be honest, one of my reputations that I have, right? I'm not going to bother you with something that is small, right? Whenever I come to you, it's going to be something that is nearly catastrophic, right? And so when people ask me, Dieter, I want your role to also participate in other functions that may dilute that reputation, I am, cautious, and I will explain to that person that is making that request that I need that reputation to be able to handle those situations. And if you ask me to do sort of like a weekly review or something like that, right, that is less urgent, a lower priority, that will dilute from my ability to perform in that area where I think my contribution is critical.
So I know we're getting questions here, and we're also keeping a time check here. So I definitely welcome questions coming from the audience. We'll take some in a couple of minutes here, but I always like to move to the audience question. But before that, an actionable insight that you can share. So as you are witnessing the change, where do you see the teams go in 3 years? What skill sets, especially people who are still coming in? Because FinOps is a relatively newer profession. And even my experience last year at FinOps X, which is just around the corner now, there were a lot of people who were just starting their career journey and entering FinOps. With this all AI shift that's happening, what skill sets you think people should be more deliberate about? Whether it's platform engineering, it's policies, what are the areas that they should focus more on?
So J.R. Stormont and I occasionally talk, right? And so one of his gripes that he had is he wants the FinOps Foundation now has over 50,000 practitioners, right? That was last year's number. I don't know how it looks this year. I'm sure he will announce it at the conference. But he wants, there's a crawl, walk, run maturity, right? And he wants the practitioner body in the crawl maturity to mature into higher maturity levels. And he has some challenges with that, right? He doesn't see that happening. And I think the reason for that is that we have newcomers in the cloud, right? So there is a constant influx of new FinOps practitioners that are basically their organization just migrated into the cloud and is fairly new, right? But on the other hand, I also see that the FinOps Foundation now is looking at the practitioners that have 6, 8+ years of experience and looking at what is their experience that they can share and how to share that with the practitioner body, right? So there is definitely that thing is happening, which is completely independent of your AI question. I think AI will generally make certain activities faster, right? Things like reviewing spreadsheets, right? Looking at multiple emails, right? What is the sentiment of this vendor? How willing are they to negotiate the price down, right? Or just questions like, what are the competitors for this vendor, right? What are the price points of the competitors compared to the one that we are evaluating, right? These types of questions, I think historically you would have gone to like a Gartner or an IDC or something like that, right? And specifically with Gartner, you need like a subscription. You can't just go and talk to an industry expert for an hour and pay them like, I don't know, $500 or $1,000 or something, right? You need a subscription. These subscriptions are not cheap. I think they start somewhere around 20,000 a month, right? So this is quite substantial for you just having a couple of questions. So we will see a shift. We still may need some of this, right? Especially if we go very deep and do vendor comparisons. That is not something that is easily publicly available knowledge, right? So Gartner does these interviews and then they collate that information and they can share that information with you for a price, right? But in general, some of the activities will be sped up substantially, right? And I've seen that, something that would have taken me like, maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, something like that, can now be done essentially in 3 seconds, 5 seconds, right? So, but not all of these activities. Remember what we talked about where that thing didn't catch the net 6 versus net 60, right? So for some activities where accuracy is required, right, you may still need that human in the loop that we mentioned before, right, to go and do a final review, make sure that everything looks okay before you sign this thing, right? But and it's unclear yet, right? We were thinking everyone will lose their jobs, right? 3 years ago. I think maybe some people still think that. But now I think we identified that it's less of the blue-collar jobs, right? The gardener, the plumber, the electrician, and more of the white-collar jobs that can be accelerated through AI, right? And as I said, I use AI every day, and my finance partners use AI every day. My manager uses AI every day, right? To speed up certain things that can be easily sped up.
Got it. So let us jump to a few questions here. I was eyeing the questions as they were coming in, and let me start with this interesting one. This is something that probably going to impact not just from FinOps perspective, but across the board. When you think about budgeting, so the question actually is: Are you budgeting AI workloads monthly, quarterly, or dynamically?
That is a good question, and it will depend on your organization, right? We do an annual budget. And so we have essentially a wish list, you can think of it, which is an online spreadsheet where each engineering leader can enter what the effort is, right? What it's called, a short description, a one-line description, and a dollar number, what they estimate that would be, right? And that is actually, that process existed before AI. So now AI just becomes integrated into this process. And then we tally up, what are the non-AI initiatives that are planned for next year, and what are the AI specific initiatives that are planned for next year, right? And then you get like a number. Let's say, the total is $15 million. Out of this is like $5 or $10 million is AI, right? And so then once you are in next year, right, and they are starting to implement those things, you're again looking at monthly budgets, and you have your typical anomaly detection, right, where you look at, we specifically look at spikes over $2,000, and that may be different for other organizations.
So essentially, split your workloads, non-AI and AI workloads, and then look at them slightly differently, given everything that we've been talking about in the last 30 minutes or so. The other question is, what's the biggest AI cost uncertainty today?
That is a good question, and I think whoever asked that question meant to look for a different answer, right? They want probably an answer that is more AI focused. But the answer that I see in the industry is that when you build an AI workload, let's say you have something like, you can now talk to your remote control and ask it questions about the movie that is being displayed, right? So the AI needs to know what's on the screen to be able to answer those things. That's one of the problems to solve. And then you can ask questions like, can you recommend a similar movie that has less violence because you want your kid to watch that thing, right? So that is something that we couldn't have easily done with unless we have a lot of metadata, right, available. And metadata means people need to tag this thing, and people are extremely expensive, right? So what can you recommend a movie that is similar but has less violence? Once the engineer implements that, right, they may aim at like 99.98% accuracy, so very high quality response. But in practice, this may cost, let's say, $50,000 a month, right? But in practice, if you move this to a lower quality, you may actually get 9 out of 10 the exact same response. Let's say at a 97% quality, right? However, at a 97% quality, that thing only costs $5,000 a month. So a difference of $45,000, which is fairly substantial, right? A month, right? So that is, you can hire another engineer to help you figure out how to reduce this cost, right? And that is what I'm seeing, that you do an initial experiment and it's very expensive, but interesting enough, when you use these large language models, you can actually reduce the quality that you're looking for, right? And substantially reduce pricing as a result, right? So I see that in, when I talk to an engineer and they come, this costs $50,000 a month, I immediately ask, like, what is the output quality of this thing, right? Can we dial the quality lower and still get, for the most part, the same results? And that is something that is actually very doable with these large language models, and it's surprisingly easy to do that.
Very, very interesting, and I'm glad you used the movie example, given that your experience at currently at Roku and before at Netflix. I think we have one more question that we can take up here. So this is an interesting one, because even before AI, this was a question or response that depended upon the company. But who owns AI infrastructure cost in your organization? Is it the CIO, FinOps, engineering? And if you don't go into specific your organization, what do you see largely where the AI budget sits?
So on the high level budget will be is owned by the VP of cloud, right? I don't know exactly what Ilya's title is, but he owns that budget, right? And that budget is determined. There is a multitude of influencing factors, right? There's the customer growth, right? Roku is growing year over year, so we need more cloud resources. That's just unavoidable, right? Because we have more customers that we need to serve. But we don't want our cloud spend to grow more than our customer spend, right? So we actually established a KPI, which is cost per streaming hour, and the mandate is to keep that KPI flat, right? So that if you introduce a new feature that has a certain cost, let's say that 50,000 a month, right? You need to find now optimizations to sponsor that feature, right? And that works extremely well, and it works so well that you can actually get sponsors from other teams as well, right? If you can find some team that says like, okay, we thought we would be spending 50,000, but we can actually do it with 5,000 a month. You can have our 45,000 and sponsor you feature. That is perfectly fine, right? Now the cost itself is owned at the minimum by each engineering leader. So each director, each manager owns their own portion of that budget, right? Roku's total cloud spend is across 3 cloud providers is between 150 and 200 million annually, right? So obviously a single director or a single manager is not going to own that entire thing. That is owned by that CIO equivalent. But each engineering leader has their own sub budget, right? That they are being held responsible to on a monthly basis where we review those things, right? And each engineer is responsible for staying within the budget of the feature that they are developing, right? And if there is if they need more budget, they need to look for funding to get the dollars to be able to spend them.
So it sounds like it's sitting in engineering, but it's very decentralized within the function.
And I think that is required for ownership, right? Because if you own something, but you have no control over it, the only thing that I can do is be mad at you, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. But if you really own your own workloads, and if you see that a reduction gives you dollars somewhere that can be spent somewhere else, right? Now, often I think the more inexperienced or the less mature managers, they think that they can convert the cloud budget into headcount, which is a common misconception, right? Headcount works completely differently. It is a role that is attached to that headcount, right? The role has a description, and the headcount is essentially a need in perpetuity, right? While the cloud budget may shift every year, right? This year, your workload was allowed 250,000. Next year, it may be 150,000 or 500,000, right? So headcount works very differently. So you can't, the cloud budget is not fungible enough to be converted into headcount, right? But if it is fungible enough to be converted into other cloud workloads, that's okay.
Got it. Dieter, I know we're up on time. There are more questions, but we'll park that for future. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us right after coming back from our trip. And again, thank you to the audience for being interactive here. Thank you so much. See you again.
Thank you so much as well for having me. It was great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Let's do it again.